Jesus is doing demo because he has to get rid of the things that keep people from really having Jesus as king in their heart. Guys, it's so easy to say Jesus is my king. It's much harder to live with Jesus as your king. There's a very big difference between those two things, between saying it and living it, and we all know this. So what was actually going on in the temple that caused Jesus to go into demo mode? Well, look at the text here. It says he went into the temple, and what did he do? He drove out those who bought and sold in the temple. So there were people who were using the gathering of God's people as a business. People were actually conducting just business. In fact, imagine going to maybe like a marketplace, or a shopping mall where from one thing to the other, people are selling stuff. We got the pretzel guy, we got the snow cone person, somebody selling shoes. Imagine that as you go to church, before you get there, everybody in front of there is just selling stuff. It's like, that's not the place for that. So he had to get rid of it because that's not the purpose of that place, right? Secondly, he had to overturn the tables of the money changers. So this is a really interesting detail. When people went into the temple to give offerings or to pay for certain things, because people would often pay for, they would give offerings and stuff, but the temple itself would only accept one form of currency. That was called the sanctuary shekel. People who lived outside of it had their own currency, or if they came from foreign lands, and for them to do stuff, to purchase like sacrifices or anything like that, they would have to exchange money. Imagine like when you go to an airport into a foreign country, like let's say you fly into Italy, right? They have a specific currency there. I forget exactly what it is right now, but yeah, like the Swiss franc or something like that. And you have to exchange your money for this other form of money. Or for kids, if you go to a video arcade, sometimes they have tokens, and you have to give them give them a quarter. They give you a token. Only the token can be used in that video game arcade, and only that particular currency or money can be used in that particular place. Well, here they had a currency for the temple, and guess what people were doing? They were charging up. It wasn't like a straight 1-to-1 ratio. They were attacking on percents, like 10% up, 15% up, 20% up. And you guys know this, like when you go to airports and you have to exchange money, very often the exchange rate in the airport, which is there, local and convenient, is much higher than what you'd find at a bank. So if you're ever traveling and you have to exchange money, don't do it in the airport if you can. Sometimes you maybe exchange like $10 or whatever. But go to a local bank. You'll get a much better exchange rate. And so these people were taking advantage of people who had to come because of religious exercise and all this kind of stuff that was prescribed in the law, and they were being ripped off. Guys, now it's one thing to be ripped off by people in the world. It's completely different to be ripped off by God's people in God's house. That's the second thing. And then the third thing is this. He overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold doves. Now this is really interesting. This is very personal for Jesus, because they were selling doves as sacrificed, as animals to be sacrificed. And I'm sure they sold other things too. There was a economic range or gamut between how much money you made and what animals you had to sacrifice. For those who were really wealthy, it was like cows and rams and all this kind of stuff, and oxen. And then you had like kind of sheep, and then you had sheep, and then you had, and the lowest level here was doves, because they were the kind of cheapest animals to come by. And so what that means is that the people who were buying doves were the poorest. And Jesus is overturning the tables and the seats of those who sold doves. People Because they were not just selling them, they were, again, upcharging them, just like the money changers and just like the thing. It was a money operation. This was a business going on in here. It was nothing short of a business. And personally, like I mentioned before, this had a lot of impact on Jesus, because if you read carefully in the text, when Jesus' parents, Mary and Joseph, went to the temple after Jesus was born, you'll see that they got doves. They themselves were a poor family. They were in that place. And so I can't help but imagine that Jesus felt a little bit personally insulted because of his family, that there would be people there at this time taking advantage and selling things for profit of those who were simply trying to come and innocently kind of purchase sacrifices so that they could have the cleansing that they needed for their hearts. So there's all this stuff going on, all this business. And Jesus is like, demo, get rid of it. Get rid of it. That's not appropriate. That's never good. And even today, if you go into churches and there's a lot of like business selling stuff, get rid of it. Get it out of there. It has no place. He get rid of the problems, and he had to, because you have to demo stuff before you can introduce what's supposed to be there. You have to get rid of the junk. So what was supposed to be there? What was this house supposed to be like? Sometimes people have that question, what is church supposed to be like? Well, Jesus pretty much tells us what the gathering of God's people is supposed to be like. He says, it is written, my house shall be called a house of prayer. Where was the praying? What is prayer? Prayer is simply talking to God, and there were all these people gathered in God's house and they weren't talking to him, they weren't interacting with him. The one reason it's there for existence is to be a God's place of representation to his people, and for people to then be represented to him and informed and taught and all this kind of stuff, these important things about people and cultures. The one thing that should have been happening all the time. And then what did they do? They turned it into a den of thieves, he says. Why weren't the people praying? Like, you got to ask the question, right? Why weren't they praying? I mean, even maybe while they were doing business, couldn't they have been like praying also? Maybe God would have told them like, stop that or do it differently. Why weren't they already seeking God? Right? In God's house, the temple of the living Lord. Well, the answer is actually pretty simple. They had replaced relationship with God with a religious system. And man, guys, let me tell you, I don't care who you are, how old, how young. I don't care what your church experience has been in the past, if you've ever even gone into a church or not, if you grew up in church, this is always, 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 always a danger. That we turn this gathering, this place of supposed to be a house of prayer, into a system, a religious system. And they had done this. They had replaced the living Lord with a religious system. Things that maybe looked like maybe having something to do with him, but really were so far. And here's the thing about Jesus. He's not going to sit second fiddle to a religious system. He's just not going to have patience for it. If you want to have a religious system, if you want to go through the motions, if you want to just like, check your box, you can do that. But Jesus is never going to be alongside for the ride. Because you're leading it. Jesus is in the back seat of the car. Or further back than that, probably. If in your life and mine this thing of prayer and talking to God becomes a secondary issue, again in the back of the car, if the simple action of just communicating with God, just talking with him, which is so simple, it's not even funny how simple it is. If it becomes rote, where all you do is just kind of repeat the same words over and over again, or it has no action, it's just missing, you just don't pray, you just don't talk, then Jesus will do to you and to me just like what he's done here in this temple. We're told in the New Testament that our bodies are the temple of the Holy Spirit. We are a temple. What does that mean as far as this text is concerned? It means that we need some demo. And then Jesus can, having cleansed us, he can then begin to put in what is supposed to be there. Not the broken down stuff, not the junk, not the system, but new life. And one of the keys of that new life that always needs to be there is prayer.